late.
Well, they're still coming in, so.
Good morning, good morning. It's time to sing praise to the Lord. Please grab a hymnal. Grab a hymnal, turn to hymn number 566. We'll sing all three verses of When the Roll is Called Up Yonder. Please stand with me. Hymn number 566. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair, when the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. On that bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of his resurrection share, when his chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let the talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then will Galilee life be over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Amen.
Well, I'm glad when Scott was leading that song, he ended, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. Good. Yes, some song leaders, they end down here, and that's not good. So, good. Well, we're so glad you're here with us this morning, and appreciate you being here. We've had a wonderful missions conference this week, and just a wonderful time with our missionaries, and we want to continue that today. Today's Faith Promise Sunday. You say, what is faith promise? Well, hang with us, and we'll tell you some more about that in the service today. But we are so glad you're here, and let me pray, and then Brother Graham's going to come and speak for us. Lord, we do thank you for a good week this week, as we've tried to focus on what heaven focuses on, and that are the eternal souls of men. And we ask for your blessing in the Sunday school hour. Help Brother Graham as he teaches and gives us some things that you've done in their life. And Lord, may it be a challenge and encouragement to our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. You may be seated. For some of you that were not able to be here this week, you've not met Brother Graham Foran. He and I were on staff together at Buffalo Ridge Baptist Church for a couple of years. He was there before me. He's much older than I am, and much more mature too, I'm sure. And within a couple of years, our time together, God called them to Brazil, and they've been in Brazil for 38 years, and they're just coming off the field. This is their last furlough, and they're living back in Tennessee. And I contacted him some time ago and said, we want you to come for Faith Promise. Our intention was just to have him here today, but we had some little struggles getting enough missionaries last week, so they came in Friday, and he spoke for us Friday night. And he'll be teaching Sunday school this morning and preaching both services. And I don't know if I've ever asked anyone to preach or teach a specific thing here at Winkler Road. I mean, I do like people to use the Bible. That's kind of our preference. But I have done that this morning, and I have seen this lesson or presentation that Brother Graham has made. I suppose I saw it at Buffalo Ridge, and just how missions works. And I think that's important for us to know, what God can do through a faithful missionary. And so Brother Graham's going to come and present this, and I know it'll be a blessing to your hearts.
Great. Thank you, Gary. We have enjoyed knowing Gary and Debbie for all these years. They've been dear friends and shared many visits together. We used to startle people when we'd both show up at the door at the same time and they thought their glasses need cleaning. But it's been great. Oh, we're going to use a passage of Scripture to start. And if you want to open, it's in John chapter 15, verse 16. You probably know it by heart, many of you. And this is just to get us started. But the name of the lesson I'm giving today is called Fruit That Remains. And I'm finishing up our missionary career. Renee and I have been in Brazil since 1988, since October of 1985 when the Lord called us to Brazil, and then our time of preparation, pre-field, and getting our support, leaving Buffalo Ridge Baptist Church in 1986. And you know what? It's been a great thing to serve the Lord. If I had 10 more lives, I would gladly do exactly what we did in Brazil. I hope I would do it better in one of the other iterations, but the Lord doesn't do that. He doesn't give us extra lives. He gives us one life to use for Him, and what's done for Christ is going to last. And here's the verse that you've found if you need to. John 15:16, ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, and that whatsoever you should ask of the Father in my name, He may give it you. Now, that's where we're going to start tonight. And so we have a PowerPoint. There it is, right there. So it's not on this screen here? No. Okay. All right. Well, I should have brought my computer up here so I could see it at the same time. Well, that's all right. I'll just turn sideways when needs be. Here's our beginning of our lesson. Now, there's a simple story that I can tell about us going to Brazil. When we got to Brazil, we were in language school. While we were in language school, the Lord used us to start a church. I'm an administrator for Brazil as well as a church planter, and I always told our new missionaries, do not get involved in a church plant while you're in language school. Well, I had reasons for saying that because we did. So I'm going to start you in São Paulo after we were a year and a half in Brazil, and we left that church that we had begun with our missionary colleagues that came in. We came down to São Paulo, and this is on the far western edge of greater São Paulo. São Paulo is a small burg of about 2 million people, 20 million people, forgive me. And we lived there for all of the time after we left language school in this particular corner of western São Paulo. So we started a church in the town named Cotia, and then we started a church in the town named Barueri. These are all parts of greater São Paulo. We started a church in the town called Jandira, and then we started a church in the city of Carapicuíba. Now, that's not the end of the story. This is just kind of the middle. But that's a pretty simple story, isn't it? We went there, started a church, found a suitable piece of property, found a school that we could meet in, or another kind of a meeting place, did Bible studies, did evangelism in the streets. We started holding services. We started a building. The construction went forward. The people grew with the church. We called a national pastor, and then we left. So that's the Cliff Notes version of church planting. And so it doesn't look like much up there. But what I want to show you, and this is what Brother Gary was talking about today, is that's not what church planting is. We prayed this morning in our prayer meeting before the service, Lord, send forth laborers into your harvest. I have beaten myself to death, and a lot of other people, trying to call people to the mission field. I can't do it. Brother Mark, I haven't figured out a way to call people to the mission field. The Lord has to do it. But what God is doing in His field, in His harvest, is calling people and raising up works. Now, one of the things I want you to see, what we're going to talk about in this lesson today, is a small corner of the mission field. This is not the world. This is only Western São Paulo. So here we are. our church plant in Cochilla. The Lord helped us to start the church in Cochilla. And out of that church came, and here's just some dots up there. Each of these dots represents a man or a husband and wife that the Lord called out of our church in Cochilla to pastor and minister in other churches. Or, as you see there, one of those arrows goes up to the orange circle. The Lord called Juan Bautista, John the Baptist. Good name, right, for a Baptist preacher. Juan Bautista, he came to our church. He had been in a ministry, a charismatic ministry, and he had been told that unless he could speak in tongues, he might not even really be saved. And he struggled. He was actually serving as though he were one of the pastors on the staff, and he just was so miserable. He told me he was ready to give up his Christian life because as much as he tried, as much as he prayed, as much as he fasted, he could just not speak in tongues. His son was attending our church, and I was doing a children's program on Wednesdays and on Sunday morning. We had a group of missionaries working together, and they were better at preaching than children's work, and I was good at children's work, so I had what I consider one of the best periods of children's work in my life. Because out of this group of kids that met on the top of the church building, it was just a flat concrete ceiling, and we sat on forms that were used for concrete during the week when we were building, on concrete blocks and on these dirty boards. Out of that group of kids that met with me on the top of the church building, there are about a dozen of them that are in ministry today. I mean, just wonderful kids. This is the story of some of those kids right here. John Bautista, he was an adult man, but his son was coming, and his wife finally came to see what was going on. And then finally, Juan came. When Juan came, somebody told me, he's a pastor at a Pentecostal church. And so I kind of did this. Hello there, how are you? Yes. I thought, you know what, we don't need anybody coming in that's going to be controversial and create problems. What I didn't realize was John Bautista was looking for help. He came to the church. After my warm welcome, he didn't come back for 6 months. But his wife kept coming. And 6 months later, he showed up at the church. He said, Pastor Will, they call me Will there, Pastor Will, tell me about the gifts of the Spirit. What really is involved? So we went to his house, we did a study with him, and he became a joyous believer, realizing that his spiritual gifts were not what he had been told. And he went off to our Bible college, he and his wife, trained in our Bible college in Curitiba, and when we started that orange church, the church in Barueri, he and his wife came in. They came without promise of money, without promise of anything settled other than a very small salary that we could offer him. And yet he said, the Lord has called me to the ministry. And he pastored that church for 25 years and did a wonderful job and turned it over to 2 of his disciples. There's a yellow circle up there. That church was founded with us with a man named Antonio Carlos. Antonio Carlos, when we started our church in Cochilla, lived in the neighborhood nearby where we lived. His children, started coming to that children's group that I was doing on top of the church in Cochilla. And sooner or later, his wife began to come, and she was converted. So the kids were saved, 3 of them. And then the mother was saved. Antonio Carlos was a soccer player, semi-professional, but very good, widely known in our area. And, he was busy on Sunday mornings. Sunday morning, soccer day in Brazil. And so he wouldn't come. Now, our co-worker, Robert Jones, they lived very close to his house, and Brother Bob worked with him regularly, evangelizing him. He became interested, but he still couldn't make that break. He even made a profession of Christ, but couldn't make that break until one day it suddenly came to him. He had a decision to make. What was most important in life? So Sunday morning of that week, he showed up in church. Now, the Sunday he showed up in church, his soccer team showed up in church too. Not to attend the service. They showed up to get him out of the service to play soccer. How could you do this to us? You're our best player. You can't leave us in the lurch. And he came to the door. He said, I found something more important. Well, Antonio Carlos and his wife are still pastoring that church in Janjita, the Good News Baptist Church. The church in Barueri is called the New Life Baptist Church. The yellow one up there, the Good News Baptist Church. Pastor Antonio is still working there. We were there Wednesday night about 2 weeks ago, and I preached for him in that service. Well, this is just the story of the Cochilla Church. You see those other little balls down there at the bottom? On the far left is that there's a C there. That represents Curitiba. All of our students, all of our young men and women that were called to ministry ended up, for the most part, going down to our Bible college in Curitiba, about 6 hours away, and getting their training there. Well, one of our disciples that went out was Evandro. Now, Evandro came to us in the group of kids on top of the building. And a lot of the kids, they didn't come for me. They came for my kids. I had an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they came to play with my kids. You know, they weren't stupid. They liked playing with our kids. But anyway, Evandro came. He was just the age of my son Nathan, attended church with us regularly. He trusted Christ somewhere along the line. I think it was our national Brazilian lady working with us that led him to Christ in one of the children's meetings. His family did not come to church. His family was from another kind of a very strict group that they believed only they were saved. You had to be baptized in their church to be saved. You've met people like that probably. And so so he came by himself, walked to church all the time, came by himself without any support from his family. But as he grew up in the church, became an adolescent, he learned song leading from me. And he passed some song leading. He began to sing solos in the church and began to sing in the choir. He eventually was used in our music program at the church. And the Lord called him to the ministry. He went off to Curitiba, did training. While down there, when he graduated, he was called by one of the churches to serve as assistant pastor in one of the churches there. He went to university, got a degree in music. He now runs the music program in the Bible college there in Curitiba and pastors a church. Evandro has a wonderful family, and they're serving the Lord there. I can't do this with every one of these, but there's one there, São Roque de Minas. One of our young men came to the church and was discipled, went to the Bible college, was called there. It's on the back side of the moon. You can't get there from here. You can't get there from anywhere. It's as far as you can go on the road, and they still have daylight. And yet he served the Lord there. He came back. He had some discouragements in the ministry, came back to our church in Cochilla, and the Lord recently has restored him. He never got into sin. He just had a difficult time. Came back. The church brought him, took him in, comforted him, encouraged him, and just recently he's gone back out to the ministry in another church, seems to be doing well up in the northeast of Brazil, and he happened to be there last Sunday when I preached there on Sunday morning. What a reunion we had. And then there's on the far right there, I'll just skip over to him, Barueri, that's Boituva. We had a young man, after we left the church and had gone on to the Barueri church, a young man came one Sunday. He said to me, he said, Pastor, my hair was like this. He said, the only thing I live for is playing soccer. I want to be a professional soccer player. The first Sunday he came to our church in Cochilla, he trusted Christ. His name is Lucio. Today, Lucio is not only, he's been a pastor, he was a pastor in Boituva in the church that he himself started in collaboration with some of our missionaries and other churches. But as he started that church, the Lord had called him into a much more ample ministry. He continues pastoring there, but he's helping other churches get founded. That's the work of the gospel. Let's do another one here. Now, the next church is Barueri. There we go, pops up there too. Look at that. Look at all those. The church in Barueri was probably one of our most fruitful churches. At one time, I think we had like 16 Bible college students out of that one church. We're talking about a church at the time between 100 and 150 people, and 16 of the young people called to the ministry. One of the things that helped was that my kids were teenagers at that point, and so the Lord used my kids to help draw people in. We could tell the stories we can tell about there. The first one on your left, Osvaldo Cruz. We had a young lady who she was saved in our Cochilla church. Their family moved over to Barueri just as we were moving over there to start our church. The mother was a maid. Her husband was crazy. I don't mean he's crazy like normal husbands are crazy, because most of us are crazy to a certain degree. No, I mean this guy was really crazy. He couldn't work. He'd stay home, and while she was out desperately trying to hold body and soul together, and this guy would take all the food and put it in a pot and try to cook it. All the food that they had for a month. She'd come home and everything was burned, everything was ruined. I don't know how many, and he would get violent. I don't know how many times I had to go over to that house and stand between him and her. And the kids were just, they were living in an abusive, horrible situation. And yet the Lord saved the wife and all three of the kids, and they were there now in our Baduidi church. And so Cynthia, the daughter, wonderful, sweet gal, at school, this guy saw her, Yuri, and Yuri decided, there's something good about that girl. I'm gonna date her. So he said to her, I'd like to date you. And she said, I can't, but you can come to church if you'd like to. So he came to church, and Yuri got saved. And the Lord called Yuri to the ministry. Yeah, he played in a rock band. And so they both went down to the Bible college. They were later married. Yuri and Cynthia serve in the city of Oswaldo Cruz, far on the extreme west of the state of Sao Paulo. Been there for now a good number of years, and helped collaborate in another church started with one of our missionaries. On the far right, that's Porto Alegre. You might have seen a few, maybe a year or two ago, that there was flooding in Brazil. It made all the news all over the country here, the great flooding that was happening down there. Well, Porto Alegre is a city, a very European kind of a city, as opposed to the rest of Brazil. A lot of Italians, Polish, and Germans live down there. But in the Baduidi church, we had another young lady named Tatiani. Tatiani was saved in our church. She had told me when we started the church, she said, I want to be a ballerina. She said, can I be a ballerina and be saved? I said, well, that's between you and the Lord. But I said, that's not, being a ballerina or not being a ballerina is not really all that important. What matters is knowing Christ. She said, yes. She thought about it. And so we went several weeks. She's listening to the service. One Sunday she came to me. She said, Pastor, I want to do that thing. I said, what thing do you want to do? She said, that thing about being saved. So Renee took her aside, led her to Christ. She became a wonderful Christian. As it turned out, she suffered abuse from her own family because she wanted to live for Christ. And as she made decisions about living for Christ, her family, who was okay with her coming to church, and they were even attending some, she was actually beaten by her mother over some of the decisions she wanted to make for Christ, going to the Bible college and all kinds of extreme things like that. And a young man came from her school, wanted to date her. He said, can I date you? And she said, no, but you can come to church with me. You can see a pattern here. Well, Wesley came and he got saved, and the Lord called him he came from a wealthy family. And he was called to the ministry. He said, Pastor, you got to talk to my folks. They do not understand what's going on. So we went to see them. And they met us, and they found out we weren't totally crazy. And it calmed them down enough that they started coming to our church. Eventually, Mother and Dad were both saved, trusted Christ in the Baduidi church. But today, Wesley and Tatiani are serving in that distant city in the far south of Brazil. So each of these balls that you're seeing up there are people who were fruit from this church and then fruit for the other church and moving on and being used of the Lord. When all that flooding went on, Pastor Wesley was our point man to receive the funds that came from our mission and from all other missions through Brazil. And even churches were sent to him so that he could administrate the relief for floods. You guys don't know anything about floods around here, I know, but you can imagine it, I'm sure, right? So up there at the top, I'll lose my way if I try to get into all these stories, but each of these represents people called to the ministry. There's a town called Cubatão where one of our young families went. They went to the Bible college, trained for the ministry, went there. The Lord used them to re-establish a church that had gone way down. Santarém, the S on the far left there, one of our young men in the Baduidi church, friends of our kids, came regularly. We had a youth program at that church. I called it Adolescence in Action. And every Wednesday night, I would take all the teenagers downstairs, the young teenagers, 12, 13, 14 years old, take them downstairs, and I would teach them. And we had up to 40 kids on a Wednesday night, young adolescents, and Huji was one of those. Huji and Rodrigo and my son Ryan. They were the Three Stooges, I think. They'd come in. I said, Huji, you sit here. Rodrigo, you sit there. Ryan, you sit in the back, Huji was terrible. He was terrible. He was a clown. All he wanted was attention, and he would cut up if you had him in the front. If he was with anybody, he'd cut up with them. So I'd move him off to the back. He'd sit by himself, and he'd make enough noise to get everybody to turn around. And I don't know how many times, because my wife taught him when he was in her Sunday school class, I don't know how many times we said, Hoogie, you got one more chance. If you won't sit still, you're going to have to go up to the service and sit with your folks. Well, he went up to see his folks a lot. He got away from the Lord. As he got older, away from the church anyway, and he finally said he wasn't converted, and the Lord made him, I can't remember the whole story now, it seems to me he got extremely sick or was near death. And so in that crisis, he came to Christ and came back to the church, felt the call of the ministry, went to our Bible college, came back, and he went to the Amazon and lived there for 6 years, pastored 3 churches in the Amazon, 3 at the same time. He and his wife. If you go over to the fellowship hall, wherever that is, that way. Okay, good. You'll see on our table there's the catfish from the darker regions. Not there. And you can see. And we were there visiting him, and he had us preach for him in his churches. And I was out on the river, and I was at a souvenir store, and I saw that catfish, and I said, I got to have one of those so you can see it. You can't have it, but I'll let you see it. But Hoogie went there and served the Lord, and now he's back, and he's one of the pastors of the WRBC church today. And Rodrigo, that was his partner in crime in the adolescent class, is the lead pastor in the church in WRBC today. Well, let's move on, because there's other stories. Yeah, Janjira, that was the church where Antonio Carlos went. Now, we didn't have as many people from that church. His 3 kids went to our Bible college and trained. One of them now lives in the far western area of Paraná, the state below São Paulo. And he's serving there with a missionary, a Brazilian missionary pastor, and they're working in their church, serving the Lord there. There is a family out of that church. I don't think I have an arrow for them. No, but they came out of that church and then came to helped us in our last church in Cotia. Now here is a picture of part of Brazil. I just want to show you how these people that the Lord called, all those little dots you saw, are going to be reproduced here. The dots show up faster there. It must be the speed of light, because they go there and it comes here, and then it goes there from here. So it takes me a little longer to see where we are. So this is down in the Curitiba, our young man Evandro. And then we have up here in São Roque de Minas, that's where our young man Luciano went when he served there in that church, which was a church plant started by a Brazilian missionary, not an American. This here is our church in WRBC, where several of our graduates are serving today. Several of those who went out of that church and went to our Bible college are back serving in their local church there in WRBC. Church runs between 200 and 250 in a very small building. It's not half the size of this one here. Then this is our Janjira church. Then we have, this is the far western. This is Yuri and Cynthia. Then we've got some up here. Oh, click it again. Okay, yes. Now, down on the coastline, Cubatão, that's one of our couples. Then up in Brasilia, one of our B's that I didn't mention was Wanderson. Wanderson came to our church. He wanted to date my daughter. Well, we just said, why don't you wait a little bit? And
she was 13.
Yeah, okay. But in the end, that didn't work out, but the Lord called him. He came unsaved and came to our church. He came because of the young people's group, enjoyed being around them. One of our members was his aunt. And so he came and liked the young people and enjoyed coming. The Lord saved him. Today, he's a pastor in Brasilia. That's the capital of the country. Let's see what else we've got here. We've got down far south, that's Wesley and Cynthia, and Wesley and Tatiani. And there's another here in São Paulo. We have a young man who was the son of Pastor João Batista. Remember him from our church in Cotia that went to WRBC? He has now left that church and is serving in the west, another city that I'll talk about later. But Eduardo and his father had a difficult time. Eduardo was not Pastor João Batista's actual son. He had married his wife, and she already had a child, and just a baby, and he adopted the child, took him in, raised him as his son. But as he got to be a younger, older teenager, Eduardo decided that he knew better than everybody else, and he wasn't going to listen, and you're not really my father, and all of that. And I mean, one time João Batista called me. He was pastoring our church, and he said, "Pastor, will you come over here?" He said, I got to put my son on the floor. And Eduardo was fighting people. He fought my son. He fought everybody. He was having fist fights at school, and he thought he could beat his dad up. And so he said, "Come over and be with us." So I stood there while João Batista put him on the floor 3 times, and he cried. Eduardo cried, and was frustrated. But his dad it didn't hurt him. He just said, "You're not the boss here." And the Lord worked in Eduardo's heart. Today, Eduardo is a pastor of a church in the city of São Paulo. Fruit that remains. Now, here's our church in Carapicuíba. We haven't talked about Carapicuíba yet. It's one of our larger buildings. The church hasn't flourished the way I would have liked to have seen it flourish. But still, the Lord's done great things in that story. So here it is, Carapicuíba. It's over on the far right here. I had some leftover arrows, so I put them in here. They sell them to you in packages, I think, so that's why I got them. Our Barueri church was, flourishing, lots of young people, and we were working in another church by this time, and one of our neighboring churches, started by a Baptist world missionary, said, "We don't have a pianist." So one of our young ladies that had gone to the Bible school was back in our church in Barueri, and so they sent her down to the Faith Baptist Church, and she played the piano for them. Well, while she was there, she met a young man who was studying in the Bible seminary in São Paulo, and you can imagine what happened. They are now married and serving the Lord. So what else have we got here? There's another arrow. That's also the church in Cochia had a group go out from it under one of the founding missionaries of that church from Baptist World Mission, who worked with us in our church there. And they went out to a nearby area. He didn't want to go to Jandira because he thought it was far away. So that they started another congregation about 15 minutes from the Cochia church, called Miranchi. It was a neighborhood. And that church was started. And so several of our people, I got some arrows here, just showed that several of our people from the Cochia were living out in that direction, so they helped establish that church. So there's a church now in that area that is fruit of the church we started in Cochia. And I had nothing to do with it, except when we formed the church, our first meeting was in the car of the other missionary, and he was president, and I was vice president, and the 2 Brazilians, Pastor João Batista and one of our other pastors, were the treasurer and secretary. They sat in the back seat. We formed the Faith Baptist Church in Mirante da Mata. And so up until just recently, I was still vice president. I didn't know that. They forgot to change the bylaws. Anyway, so we're moving on here. And so here's Carapicuíba, a church that struggled, a church that never produced what we would like to have seen them produce. And yet the Lord, in the time we were there, called people to the ministry. Up in the northeast of Brazil, there are 3 of our young people, 2 men, and one of them married a girl who was saved in our church in Carapicuíba. And they are serving the Lord in the northeast. They went to a Bible college up there that one of our co-worker missionaries was working in. And then you see the other arrow. This is interesting. The speed of light has gone backwards, okay? Here we go. All right, interesting. All right, don't turn around and look at the back wall, you'll be confused. One of our young men that came while we were planning the church in Carapicuíba wasn't able to stay with us real long, but the Lord brought him in. He and his wife knew nothing about the Christian life except they were saved. In fact, I think Renee actually led Elisanja to the Lord because she was just uncertain. But Danilo, they trusted Christ. Danilo said, "The Lord's calling us to the ministry." So they went down to our Bible college in Curitiba, studied there. They went up to the far north of Brazil and started a church. He, a missionary, brand new, starting a church in Brazil. In the meantime, our church in Cochia had a long string of good pastors who had stayed for a long time. I mean, this church has been going on for years now. Danilo and Elisanja up there, suddenly she develops physical problems. She has to move somewhere where there's good medical care. He began to think, I need to go to São Paulo area. Our church in Cochia, the pastor suddenly was called by the church he came from in Brasilia. So he said, we're leaving. In the process of looking for a pastor, Cochia found Danilo, and today Danilo is pastor of our Cochia church. So look how this goes. We're working, we're serving, we're planting seeds, and the Lord is just bringing things together. And he's doing a fantastic job. The churches, we were there last Sunday morning, preached there. Just fantastic work going on in the church. These other arrows here represent the other young people from that church. So no, the church hasn't flourished like we'd like to have seen it flourish. And yet the Lord raised up people who are serving the Lord around Brazil. Here's a picture. Then from Cochia, as we were getting ready to start our work there, the Lord called from Cochia a young man who had been saved in the church after we left, went to our Bible college, and as he was graduating, we were ready for him, and he came to our church in Jardim, Japan. He is the pastor now of the Grace Baptist Church, he and his wife. There's another story. So here's some more dots. Let's just put a few more on there randomly. This is up in the Northeast, our young people from Carapicuíba. Here's the guy who came back from the Northeast and down in São Paulo, in Cochia. And then let's see what else we got. Okay, we got Romans chapter 15. Now, I've got just about 8 minutes. I want to tell you the rest of the story. Okay. Friday night when I preached, I talked about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul said, I want to go to Spain, and on my way, I want you to help me. Well, did he ever make it to Spain? Well, we don't know. The Bible never tells us if he got to Spain. But missionaries need to make plans. You need to plan, and you don't always know how the plans are going to work out, but you do know this. If you go out and you try to serve the Lord will use you and your fruit, because his word never returns void. Now, the couple you see right here, this couple are the couple that God used to call Renee and I to Brazil. He preached, his name was Robert, her name Corinne Jones. They preached in our church, and as they preached that night on a Sunday night in October of 1985, the Lord spoke through him that we were going to Brazil. He said, if the Lord is calling you to Brazil to work with us, come forward. I went forward that night. The Lord spoke in our hearts. Renee, when we got home, Renee stayed up all night, turning her house over, our brand new house, over to the Lord. It was a mansion, you can't imagine, 900 square feet. Enormous. I mean, we couldn't hardly turn around without hitting the walls. But it was ours. And the Lord, she turned over everything. She turned the wallpaper over. She turned everything over to the Lord that night. The next morning, I got up. She said, I'm ready to go to Brazil. I said, good, you go. I'll stay. But we were called to work under Brother Jones. I may talk about more of that later. And Brother Jones had this idea. Those crosses down there represent churches he had already started. But when he came back, he said, I have this vision of starting churches on the corridor straight west from São Paulo. There are no independent Baptist churches in this corridor between Apóstolo Tavares and Castelo Branco, and that's my goal. And so we went there to help Brother Jones with his ministry, and there we are. All 4 of our kids are there. Incognito, the 4th child is there. Language school does that to people. Yeah. But the Lord called us to Brazil. And here is a diagram representing the corridor. First church is in Cochia. You know about Cochia. There's the building. After that, you'll see a little cross there. That's the last church Bob had started it was in officially São Paulo. We're now in greater São Paulo in the periphery. Now, another church, we had a family come to our church in Cochia, and they lived out in Vargem Grande, and after being with us for a few months, they went on out, and with another missionary, they started a church in Vargem Grande Paulista. Then we started the church in Barueri. There's the Barueri church. It's a different color now. And then we started the church in Jandira, and you see all along this corridor, we're moving out. There's the church in Jandira. That handsome guy in the front is me. It's not Gary, but it's me. And then, so now, another missionary with Baptist World came along, and because we were in the area to fellowship with us, he started a church a little further back in. And then the church in Miranchi that was started out of the Cochia church, that's the next cross there. And then we started our church in Carapicuíba, and while we were starting the church in Carapicuíba, another missionary, the son of this missionary here, came, and he started Faith Baptist Church right along the highway there, and that's the church that Renee and I worked in for 2 years while we were between churches. And that's where that young lady came down and met the young man and got married. And so then we started our church in Grace Baptist Church here on the far periphery. Once you left our neighborhood, you were no longer in Greater Sao Paulo. You were in the interior of Sao Paulo. So we were at the far edge of Greater Sao Paulo. And so there's our church in Greater Sao Paulo. Now, at the same time we were starting our churches, another group of missionaries formed a church in some churches in Sorocaba. They formed 6 churches in the city out on Raposo Tavares, going out further together. Those churches, one of the churches has closed, but the other 5 churches are working together. No missionaries any longer. There are no missionaries in any of these churches here that we established. Here's a church in Boituva started by Pastor Lucio that was saved in the Cochilla church, who then the Lord called to the ministry, and he founded that church as a missionary. Here's a church in Porto Feliz that he, with another missionary, started, and now Pastor Lucio is back in the Boituva church. Here's a church in Tatuí started completely by national churches, though some American missionaries with funds that our mission was able to supply helped them buy land. And then we have a church here. This is the last American missionary on this map. The rest of his team is formed by Pastor Lucio and his church, the church in Tatuí, all nationals, and they're founding a church now in the city of Ipiró, and this missionary team is planning another church in Sequillo. Now, what am I saying here? Here's a little strip of geography. We're talking about, 25 miles. 25 miles, and 30-something years of missionary service, not just us, collaboration together with people from other mission boards even at times. And here's an area that had no independent Baptist church today. You can go a few miles and find one wherever you are. Now, the wonderful thing is about it, our kids marry their kids, and their kids marry our kids, and people come out, and they're moving from one area, they find a church. I mean, it is what we call fruit that remains. With the exception of the church there in Ipiró, the missionaries are essentially gone. But we're here, but they're doing the thing, their work. Jesus said, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. And what is that? Preaching the gospel, making disciples, baptizing them, and doing the same thing again. I wanted to bring Americans to Brazil. The Lord said, that was my plan. God said, I got plenty of workers here. And he's raising up. That is missions full circle. Well, Lord bless you and thank you. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that this morning people will have a vision of what missions needs to do and wants to do. This is your plan, and we're fulfilling your plans. Our plans are perhaps viable, but your plan is always the best. And thank you so much for all you do through us.